Joining us live this morning from Singapore is James Dorsey, who is an award winning scholar and journalist with a different perspective on the Middle East and a senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. James, thank you very much for your time. And as always, it's a pleasure to have you on Radio Islam International.
Good morning. The pleasure is always mine.
Let's start off with the first story this morning. Israel sabotages Gaza ceasefire negotiations and heads towards occupation of Gaza.
Indeed. So Israel has, together with backed by the United States, has been systematically changing the goalposts in the stalled Gaza ceasefire negotiations. So in August, you had the situation where where Hamas had accepted a U.S. proposal that had been endorsed by Israel several months ago, which called for a 60-day ceasefire in Gaza. Israel responded to that by saying, as did the U.S. Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, that the time for temporary ceasefires was over, that there had to be a permanent ceasefire that would lead to the release of all hostages. Hamas in recent days has said that it accepts a comprehensive ceasefire on condition that Israel withdraws from the Gaza Strip and that the ceasefire is permanent. Israel has responded to that, or Israel refused for about 2 weeks to respond to the Hamas statement, has now said that, or dismissed the Hamas statement as fake and not sincere. So in effect, what Israel is doing is sabotaging a ceasefire. And at the same time, you're seeing mounting steps by the Trump administration against Palestinians, and particularly against the Palestine Authority, the West Bank-based internationally recognized representation of the Palestinians. We've seen the barring of Palestinian officials, including President Mahmoud Abbas, from attending the United Nations General Assembly in New York later this month. We've seen the barring basically of all Palestinian passport holders from entering the United States. And in the last 24 hours, the sanctioning of 3 Palestinian human rights organizations who had supported the South African case in the International Court of Justice, alleging that Israel was committing genocide in Gaza.
Now, private sector and limited government sanctions are troubling Israelis, but not enough to push Prime Minister Netanyahu to reconsider his policies. That may change as Israel, backed by the Trump administration, rejects a ceasefire and moves to make Gaza increasingly unlivable, pressuring Palestinians to immigrate.
Indeed. So we're seeing 2 parallel, if you wish, and contradictory developments. One is the U.S. moves against the Palestinians in support of Israel. The most recent statement by the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, which seemed to endorse a potential Israeli annexation of at least parts of the West Bank in response to Western nations, U.S. allies, planning to recognize Palestine as a state at the UN General Assembly later this month. And on the other hand, we're seeing a growing storm, if you wish, in the rest of the world, particularly in Europe, where you're seeing increasing boycotts of Israel's, sanctioning of Israel's, not so much by governments, although in a limited degree by governments, but by corporations, by civil society organizations. And Israel disregards that at its peril. Keep in mind that while the United States is indeed the foremost supporter of Israel, militarily, economically, and politically, diplomatically, Europe is Israel's largest trading partner. It's also its largest investment partner. So if and when sanctions start to kick in by the Europeans, serious sanctions that start to hit where it hurts, that's something that Israel is going to have to take account of. What you're seeing right now is a situation where the Europeans have focused on wanting to see increased aid, free flow of aid into Gaza. But at the same time, Israel is, for all practical matters, leveling Gaza City to the ground in preparation of a ground offensive, coupled with discussions in Israel, not yet a policy decision, to annex part of the West Bank. That could indeed prove to be a watershed in which in which European governments feel that they no longer can stand on the sidelines and wait and see what happens.
And then the Gulf Arabs join 8 flotillas seeking to break Israel's siege of Gaza.
So you have the third attempt by civil society organizations, activists setting sail towards Gaza in the Mediterranean Sea with the aim of breaking Israel's siege of Gaza. This time round, this is the biggest of those attempts. It's 50 ships, crews, activists on board from 44 countries. But importantly, for the first time, you're seeing Gulf nationals participate in a flotilla. There's a boat among those that's a part of the flotilla that has Omani, Bahraini, Kuwaiti, and Qatari activists on board. And that's remarkable because the Gulf states ban, by and large, expressions of pro-Palestinian expressions, certainly public pro-Palestinian expressions, and of course are countries that significantly restrict freedom of expression. So this is basically an indication of what is across the Middle East, but also in the Gulf, mounting anger at Israel for its Gulf War conduct, but also frustration with Arab impotence in trying to end the war and the carnage in Gaza, but also in the perception of some the Gulf states aligning themselves with some of the war goals in Gaza, even if they regularly and continuously criticize Israeli war conduct, and of course try and push the concept of a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
And then finally, U.S. demands for Hezbollah disarmament puts Lebanon at risk.
Indeed. So you basically have a situation where the Lebanese government, as part of the ceasefire, has committed under U.S. pressure, but also for its own reasons, to disarm Hamas. And as a matter of principle, that obviously you need a monopoly of violence, if you wish, or monopoly of armed force in a state to be with the government, rather than have individual armed groups that, in the case of Hezbollah, certainly prior to the war between Israel and Hezbollah, was a much stronger military force than the Lebanese National Army. The Lebanese government has committed to disarmament. It hasn't laid out how and when it wants to do that. And at the same time, Hezbollah, even though severely weakened by the war with Israel, has said that it will not disarm, at least not as long as Israel occupies any part of Lebanon, and is willing, at least says it's willing to risk an armed confrontation with the Lebanese army. So this is a standoff which puts the Lebanese government between a rock and a hard place, given the American insistence that Hezbollah has to be disarmed.
James, thank you very much for your time this morning. Much appreciated on Radio Islam International.
As always, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Sunbeam Steel, suppliers of all steel products.